They all were silent and looked at me like I had three heads. And I thought, I can't work here. These men are outrageous. I can't work with these people. I'm Angela Connor, and this is Now Look Inward. Now Look Inward is a challenge to corporate America to sweep around its own front door, get its house in order, and make Black voices and contributions matter inside their organizations. Raising consciousness is a path forward, and practicing what you preach is a must. It's time to do the real work. Welcome to episode 6 of Now Look Inward. As you know, or maybe you don't know, I interview guests on the podcast every other episode, and the weeks when I don't have a guest, I typically do what I call a solo cast, which is when I talk about something that may be on my mind or share a story, or maybe even sometimes read some feedback from people who've listened to the podcast and have shared their thoughts. I do have quite a few of those that I'd like to share, but today I'm going to talk about an incident that I have not really talked about with anyone, and I've been debating what to do. I thought about writing about it, maybe sharing a post on LinkedIn, maybe sharing something on my personal blog, and I've been going back and forth. And even with this episode, I was going to write it all out so that it was more scripted, and I was very deliberate about how I talked about it. So when I thought about that I'm essentially trying to censor my own self, I can't do that. So I'm going to share this incident. Of course, we talk about corporate America here. So I'm going to talk about something that happened to me that is still on my mind and that weighs pretty heavily. So here goes. I was attending a leadership meeting. This was an on-site leadership meeting of all of the senior leaders in the organization, including the CEO. And I was a VP, one of the senior leaders. And this was a group of about 11 or 12 of us. And I was the only woman. There was another woman on the leadership team, but she had recently left. So it was me, the only woman, and I was also the only Black person, so the only Black woman. And, you know, if you've heard me talk about how I don't typically lead with race or focus on that so much, I've been the only one in the room. So this was not the biggest of deals. You know, we had our big leadership meeting, and now we were having dinner at the hotel in a restaurant within the hotel. So during this conversation, and just to give you a little bit of the lay of the land, these are all probably boomer men, boomer and above. I'm not sure if there were any Gen Xers. Now, I'm a card-carrying Gen Xer. Maybe there was one, but most of them were older. So the conversation came up about Colin Kaepernick and the other NFL players who had been kneeling during the national anthem. This was a time when this was actively happening all the time. So this conversation came up, and one gentleman started talking about how he just couldn't understand it, how it makes no sense. They're all just rich, spoiled brats, and a couple other colorful names, and how dare they not honor the national anthem. And others were chiming in, and they just continued on and on and on to talk about it. And I am enjoying my salad and just kind of listening to the conversation, knowing that I didn't like it, but I wasn't quite sure what, if anything, I was going to do or say. And then the conversation turned to President Barack Obama, and another leader said that he had no problem with Barack Obama, and in fact, he liked him until the first time he heard him reference another Black man as brother. Now, you all know that Black men reference one another as brother. Heck, white men reference one another as brother. But this particular reference was deeply offensive to this man, and he was quite passionate about it. So more conversation ensued there, and then it went back to the football players. And because I know firsthand what Black men experience with the police in America, not all Black men, because I know it is not an experience that everyone has. But I was married to a black man for 21 years, lived with a black man for 21 years, and therefore lived through some of the instances that he endured, whether it was being harassed by a police officer, whether it was being, thrown against his car door, being pulled over multiple times. I mean, over a 21-year marriage, you hear the things that happen. And not only did I hear the things that happened, I saw the anguish and I saw what it did to him and how he felt, how it emasculated him, how it made him feel like he didn't matter. And there were many, many times he would come home and tell me stories like that. So I'm thinking of this as I'm listening to these gentlemen talking about the lack of respect that these football players were displaying by kneeling. And again, they're very heated, very passionate about it. I don't even know that anyone thought about the fact that there was a black woman in the room or if it even mattered. So I ultimately excused myself and I left the restaurant and went out into the lobby of the hotel, and I was almost shaking. I just couldn't believe that this was happening right in front of me, just the level of disrespect. And I called a friend. I called my friend Jerry, and I'm so glad he answered. And I said, hey, and I was out of town, so I wasn't at home. And I said, hey, I'm at this meeting, and I am literally shaking. Let me tell you what's happened. Let me tell you what they're saying and how I feel. And he said a couple things and, told me don't let it get to me, go back inside. And I told him I wanted to leave and go to the airport. And he was supportive of that, too. I think he was just trying to tell me that there was no wrong decision for what I wanted to do at the time. So I decided to go back in. I sat back down. The conversation was still going on. And I said, hey, I have to tell you guys, after hearing everything that you said and sitting here listening to you talk about the disrespect of NFL players who are kneeling in honor of, kneeling because they are in support of black men and wanting this police brutality to end, and listening to the level of cluelessness you have about it, I have to let you know that I've experienced this through a black man. I lived with a black man. And sort of what I just laid out to you a few minutes ago, I conveyed to them as well. And they all were silent and looked at me like I had three heads. And I thought, I can't work here. These men are outrageous. I can't work with these people. So I managed to just make it through dinner and, of course, went back to my room. And the next day I got on a flight and I left. And I did speak with someone who was in that meeting who worked with me in our home office. And I went to him on Monday, and he felt that it was off and bad and awful. And I told him that I had never felt anything like that before and how I was deeply offended. And he mentioned that he was offended as well and how he couldn't believe that they said these things, but he never said anything. He never spoke up. And so that's the story there of what happened, which was very difficult to sit through. I mean, I'm seeing this blatant racism in my face. I don't know if they deemed it as racism, but I did. And so I left the organization probably a couple days after that. And sometime in October, July, August, September, October, 4 months later, I sent an email to the CEO. And I looked at that email recently and I thought, I think I'm going to read this email on my podcast because I feel nervous about it. And when I feel nervous about something or I'm having this inner dilemma about it, I know that I need to push through and do what the courageous thing is. So it's not going to be easy for me to read this, but I'm going to. I'm not going to say his name. So name. Now that our agreement has timed out and I am not longer receiving any benefits from your organization, I'd like you to know that I felt racially discriminated against before leaving the company. The events that took place in City X, I won't name it, at the dinner during the leadership meeting the Thursday evening before were outrageous and completely unacceptable. The conversations about Trump, Obama, and the black football players were deeply offensive to me, and I believe you sensed it. I know firsthand that name, this is the person I worked with, felt the same way. You didn't speak up or do anything to remove the discomfort and blatant racism taking place in that room, and I found it deeply disappointing. I left the room at one point to get myself together because I was in sheer disbelief and wanted to leave and head to the airport. I don't see how any African-American woman can flourish on your leadership team. When I came back and talked about why I support black men for kneeling and the racism I witnessed my husband experience, the room was silent. And then I say a couple things about our agreement, which I won't say here. And then I move on and say, but I have to tell you that I think you are highly accountable. And I found the timing of everything very odd. You don't have to respond to me as there is nothing to say, but I feel discriminated against. And after that experience with at least a half room of racists, I was pretty scarred. What a hostile situation that was for me. I thought Company X was better than that, but clearly I was wrong. Angela. Now, whatever you think about that letter or that email, that's how I was feeling at the time. And it just felt so unresolved by never having let him know what I knew that he knew and I knew that he felt. And I thought, how are you the CEO of this company and you hear all of these white men around you who look just like you saying all of these things, and even if you don't agree with them and you don't want them to know it, at least change the freaking conversation. I mean, nothing ever happened. And when I talked to my coworker back at the office about it, I mean, I liked that he felt as though what had happened was awful, but he never said a word. And that just leads me to the whole idea of silence being complicitness. You know, if you're silent, maybe you're being complicit. And I'm just glad I don't work there anymore. It was terrible. And I have finally talked about this story. So maybe I won't think about it that much anymore. And this was just a big one for me. I mean, it felt so bad. I just felt myself getting smaller in that room. And I'm not small, and I'm not a shrinking violet, and I don't like to feel small. And you know, a piece of me just wanted to stand up and tell them all off and just never come back. And when I tried to appeal to them by telling them what I had witnessed by being married to a black man and seeing all of this, they didn't even care. I mean, I poured it all out. Again, very similar to the way that I poured it out to you here in this episode. And it was just blank stares as if to say, so, and what does this have to do with anything? That's just what happens. And I've had a lot of experiences in my career, but that was a tough one. So there it is. I'm going to wrap up here. I will be back on the next episode with an interview with someone fabulous and awesome who has a lot of things to say. If you're that fabulous someone or that awesome someone, reach out to me and let me know. I'd love to have you on the podcast. You can find me at angela@changeagentcommunications.com. I don't know if you learned anything on this episode. Maybe this was just therapy for me. I needed to get it out there, and I'm glad that I did. Thanks for listening, and I will be back in a week. This podcast is recorded at Triangle Podcast Studio in Cary, North Carolina. For more information, visit trianglepodcaststudio.com.